And I would like to make a special welcome to those on YouTube that will see us at a future date. As we know, the Centers for Spiritual Living is a Christian-based philosophy formulated from the teachings of Ernest Holmes. And the textbook we use, what we're going to look at today, is called The Science of Mind. A few of Ernest Holmes's inspirations and teachers were Emmett Fox, Norma Vincent Peale, and Emma Curtis Hopkins. Emma was the last in a long line of metaphysical leaders, and many of her students and contemporaries in the community called her the teacher of teachers. Miss Hopkins introduced Ernest Holmes to mysticism and taught him about listening to his inner voice. He himself is considered a modern-day mystic. Ernest Holmes opened his first office in California as a spiritual counselor in 1915, and quickly learned that when we try and force the universe to give us what we think we want, the universe will teach us the art of patience and working with the flow of the universe. Shortly after that office was open, it closed. He started speaking to small groups in 1916 and began publishing the Science of Mind magazine in 1927. And it has been in continuous publication ever since. I would invite you to the Science of Mind archive website at some time to see the past issues of the magazine. But they've started scanning in all of the physical copies to be electronic. And it was interesting because one of the homework assignments of my Teachings of Ernest Holmes class was to go out and find the magazine that corresponded with our birth month and year. It was very interesting to find the publication that was printed in December 1968. And in 1968, it only cost 50 cents. So that was really, it's cool. So when they scan them, it's the original pages. So the font is there, kind of the grammatical flow is there, all the pictures. So it's pretty interesting. So we continue our annual theme of living everyday wonder, and August is nature. And this week's topic is water. Did you know that 71% of the planet's surface is covered in water, and yet only a small percentage is usable for drinking and agriculture? Our monthly summary asks us to remember that if we believe that God is all there is, that we should live in a manner that reflects this truth. How do we move from just saying the words that we are one and we live in harmony with the planet and nature, and then have those words show up in real and tangible ways? For me, as many of you know, Robert and I are beekeepers. We have hives in our backyard, and our partner's yard is a few blocks away, and we have a third location that we support at the beach with another beekeeper. We've planted tons of fruit-bearing trees in the yard, much to Robert's chagrin, because he's at the point where he has to use the weed whacker to mow the grass in the backyard. And we've covered more than half of the grass in raised beds to grow our own food. Less grass means less water used for no reason. We don't use any chemicals to leach back into the water tables. And the armadillo that visits us regularly is very grateful for that, because he can search for his grubs without chemicals. And the cats have a meeting in the backyard with this armadillo on a regular basis. It's very interesting. We compost just about everything that we can back into the garden beds, as well as very conscious recycling. And recently installed a full solar package on the house. So while we may never monetarily or agriculturally realize the investment of all of these things in our lifetime, And I don't share this to brag, but more to show an example of what our vision is for this little section of the planet. Our grandchildren will realize these things. And as an end-of-life doula, we help clients with what's called a legacy project, meaning what do we want to be left behind when we're gone? Because ultimately, that's really all we have. I see my entire home and outdoor space as a living legacy project. Those are the kinds of things that I'm encouraging you to think about as we spend the month talking about nature and our impact on it and our role in it. On a side note, Tuesday, August 9th, CSL acknowledged the International Day of World Indigenous Peoples. I don't know if you knew that was August 9th. And they are promoting UNESCO and its mission under the Spiritually Motivated Social Engagement Committee. And within this committee, they're writing statements on global issues, which I've shared before, and where CSL stands on them and can be found on csl.org under the About Us tab. It's very interesting. If you go and read some of the posts that they're writing about, it's pretty powerful. UNESCO stands for United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. I had no idea that this was actually even a thing. So it's pretty interesting to go check out the website. CSL's global vision calls us to see a world that works for everyone. You will see that line in every single thing that CSL as an organization puts out. And I would like to encourage you to look around where you live to see what you can do to make a difference in making the CSL global vision a reality, starting with your relationship with nature and water. That you can visit the UNESCO's website and see if there's something there to contemplate or to maybe do. CSL and the SMSE committee believe that through our spiritual practice and the resulting actions we take from a consciousness of love and respect, we can create a new story to be told in the future, a living legacy. And a story of cooperation, celebration, and inclusion of the wisdom of all the people on the planet. It's very powerful. Very powerful words that are coming from the organization these days, and I'm super grateful for it. Now, I promised you this week that we would draw a connection between man and God and water to correspond with the theme of the week. So I hope you're ready. For those of you who have your textbook, I'd like you to turn to page 106. And the title of the chapter is Man's Relationship to the Spiritual Universe. And the section we're going to look at is Man Reenacts the Nature of God. So the first paragraph says, whatever is true of the universe as a whole must also be true of the individual as some part of this whole. Man is evolved from the universe as a self-conscious, thinking center of living spirit. And as such, he must, in his nature and being, reproduce the universe. This paragraph speaks directly to our connection to the universe. And because we are evolved or manifested from the universe as the living spirit, we must be one of it. There is no other way to scientifically explain it. If nothing else, this teaching will challenge you to investigate all the programming that we got in our early lives. I know it does for me every time I pick up a book and turn a page. Another word we use in New Thought for God is universe. because so many of us have been taught that God is some person of elderly descent located outside of us. We use a lot of different words to describe the same thing. You'll find that quite a bit in the textbook and this teaching in general. The next paragraph says, if we realize that God is triune, and if we turn to the glossary on page 639, triune refers back to the Trinity. And the Trinity on page 638 talks about the threefold universe. And the Trinity of God is the spirit, soul, and body. And we duplicate that same Trinity within us as the physical form of God. And the glossary goes on to share with us that man is the little circle and God is the big circle. We are a point in universal consciousness, which is God, and God is of our life spirit, mind, and intelligence. We are not separate from life, nor is it separate from us, but we are separate entities in it. We are not separate from life, nor is it separate from us, but we are separate entities in it. And it's also important to know that as we study the textbook, that the glossary is there to help us understand the concepts of the introduction sections. That it's not your Webster's definition of these words that appear in the textbook, which I love because it lends a whole nother layer of understanding. And they're provided to help us have a workable knowledge of the Science of Mind text. And it helps expand the concepts that we'll find in the individual pages. So fun stuff. So as you travel through the book, and if you decide to dive in to a little bit of study, see if those words are also back in the glossary and what the expanded definition is. I'm a big fan of the concordance books, and to see how many times words appear in a book. So again, that's just me dorking out about certain texts. I have one for the Course in Miracles too. So let's continue to the next paragraph on page 106. If we realize that God is triune and that man is a spiritual likeness of God, we shall see that the whole scheme of life and the whole nature of the divine being is reenacted through man. This, of course, does not mean that that man is God. It means that his small world of individual expression, his nature is identical with God's. Wow. Right? So if we go look at what the glossary says, what divine being is on page 577, that being is generally used as a conscious existence. When capitalized being, it refers to the divine being of God. Another name for God, divine being. There is but one source of being God, and we are connected with it at all times. Here we have another reference to God and man being the same. It makes me think, how would we have shown up all of these years leading up to this very moment if we really understood those concepts, that understood who and what we are? Now, hopefully light bulbs are continuing to go off, moments of remembering as we explore some of these concepts, because people that are new to the teaching and are new to the Centers for Spiritual Living, it is an absolute foreign concept and borderline blasphemy. And it's great to have other words to use to try and explain this concept when we're having conversations of people of what is science mind, what is it about, what do you teach, what do you believe? And I find, especially in Florida where we are, it can be a difficult conversation of, what do you mean you think you're God? It's like, well, let's expand on that a little bit. It's not quite just that. It's a much larger concept. How would we speak to ourselves if we knew that our nature was identical to God? It gives a whole new meaning to the body temple, doesn't it? And we continue with the third paragraph in the textbook. This is what Jesus meant when he said, as the Father hath life within himself, so hath he given to the Son to have life within himself. This refers to inherent life, real life. That is the only life God could have. We must expect to find in man, therefore, the same inherent attributes that we find in the universe from which he springs. A single drop of water is not the whole ocean, but it does contain within itself the same qualities and attributes. The direct link to this theme of water and nature and our role in it is this sentence. Ed and I had many conversations over the years of this particular sentence. Finally, it solidified for him what we had been talking about all the time, of that we are not the entire ocean, but we are a drop within that ocean. And that seems to be a clearing of the confusion of being as God when talking about who and what we are. The sentence, as the Father hath life within himself, so hath he given to the Son to have life within himself, comes directly from John chapter 5, verse 26. Ernest Holmes is not making this stuff up. We are a Christian-based teaching into the Bible and the teachings of Jesus and all of these things amongst many other teachings. So he's not pulling words out of the sky and saying that this is what he believes. It's actual text that appeared in the Bible. How do I, as a single drop of water in the vast ocean of the universe, make a difference? And how do you, as a single drop of water in the vast ocean of the entire universe, make a difference? To recall the reading today, Ernest Holmes knew in his heart of hearts that as we believed, as Jesus did, in the power of the mind, we had the same connection to God. We could walk on water, and that someday we will again. I was reminded this weekend in my ethics class by my friend, Reverend Verona, who also is from Agape. I don't know what we were talking about this. Like, I don't know what goes into the water at Agape, but I really, it's crazy. And I'm so grateful that Reverend Elizabeth has gone there and is sharing all of that energy with us. She reminded us that Jesus was the example, not the exception. We have to remember that. We make a difference when we decide how we think and how we speak and how our footprints are left on this planet each and every day, remembering that we are of God. Are you living as the highest good, or are we living in the highest good for me? The highest good of all, or the highest good for me? I have to remember that, and I have to think of that. And what does that look like to you? It's important things to think about. That we can sit here all day long debating and discussing the image and likeness of God. And until we have the willingness to say, yes, yes, I am, and embody it, nothing's going to change. And the last paragraph reads, man is made out of and from life. As effect must partake of the nature of its cause, so man must partake of the divine nature. And divine nature is described as the true nature of all things in the glossary. So must man partake in the divine nature from which he springs. We did not create our nature. We cannot change its inherent reality. We are what we are, and we use this nature for better or for worse. Being what we are, there are certain responsibilities that go with our natures, certain obligations. If our thought is creative, and if we have selectivity, that is volition, meaning the power to act independently, the power of conscious choice, that is volition and choice, or free will, which we all know those words. And if we are unfolding to a discovery of our true nature, we must already be perfect. Then the obligation and responsibility of this nature could impose freedom or bondage upon us temporarily. And then you'll see the words in the textbook are italicized because they're important for us to pay attention to. But our bondage cannot be real from the standpoint of the absolute. And again, absolute is another word to describe God. Our bondage cannot be real from the standpoint of God, because God puts nothing in bondage. God is only love, and it is us that puts ourselves in bondage in our ego mind. Again, when you travel through the textbook and you see sentences that are italicized, they're there for us to pay special attention to. In closing, I ask that you move through the next week thinking about your divine nature. Nature as it refers to the earth and how it refers to us as individual expressions of God. We talked about how Ernest Holmes thought he knew what the universe wanted by hanging out a shingle, when all it really wants for us is to be our authentic self, whatever that looks like. CSL Home Office is asking us to do some research into UNESCO and how we can support that movement. In your meditations, in your work, in your interactions with your friends and families and coworkers, how does a world that works for everyone manifest for you? How is your single drop of water going to make a difference in your world? Not necessarily in the whole world, but in your world. Because when we choose to make those differences in our worlds, in small movements, it ripples out. That single drop of water hits the ocean and ripples out into unknown infinity. And those single decisions, we may never see what happens further down the road. But if we intentionally go forward as divine beings with divine nature, knowing that we are the physical manifestations of God, we can't do it wrong. We can't, we know there are no mistakes, but we can't do it wrong if we go into it with that mindset. Thank you very much for your time today.